Good afternoon. So let's talk about the main points, about the main aspects of BGP networks. Yesterday we learned that BGP has been broken and everything is bad there. So today let's try to have a look at some of the aspects that have been broken, were a little bit rectified, and how we can use them. Probably BGP can live for a while. So communities. I think that all of you know these mechanisms, the identification mechanism that brings you the information. BGP started as AS2 byte system, and that was the community mechanism. It was originally made for AS2. AS4, that was a new type of autonomous system, and there was no mechanism that could provide for the efficient transfer of the information for 4-byte system. There are different types of hacks and the ways to tackle those problems, but looking into the future, it creates more and more problems, and we do not see any solutions and how we can support that. So one of the examples, the example of using extended communities, that is one of the new BGP tools. It was originally used for some other purposes. First of all, it was used for VPN, and it had some data and information about the location of the routers and where there is a need for specific routers. And if we have a look at unicast routers, we will see that there are more than 1,000 instances in such communities, and it is used for specific purposes in order to transfer the information about ASN numbers for 2 bytes. And there are some other options. For example, if we have a large autonomous system, we can divide it into 2 parts equivalently, as we used to do in the AS documentation. And then, as a result, instead of a large community, we will have 2 smaller communities that will have each of them half of this data. And the problem that arises there is that it can lead to a conflict. And if we divide the numbers in the autonomous system, then it can coincide with the legal legitimate AS2, and the policy is not quite clear. And we can use another type of community to tackle this problem. In order to transfer part of the information, we should use the mechanism that has 3 different components. Another popular option that has been used by many operators is just remapping, just moving from AS2 to AS4. Yes, it does work, but you should have the special table for that, and the remaining AS2 system with the specific indicators, and you do not always have such systems. That is a small example that has been taken from a live network. We took that several days ago. Example of how operators communicate with each other, how they transfer information about AS4. And here we see the extended communities bearing the same amount of information. In order for the other party to understand it, you have to make an agreement about the special signaling tool or signaling mechanism that will say that I will be using this policy for this purpose. Of course, it can work, but it would be good for it to work better. There were some probes, some attempts to resolve this problem. About 10 years ago, we used to have the so-called flexible communities. This is a type of container that can bear much more than just an extended community, and that was the first type that could transfer the information with 4-byte systems. And one of the fundamental problems of such solutions was that they were not trivial for the application, for equipment suppliers, and they are not compatible with operational tools and operational systems that are necessary for their respective technical support. It's not only about providing documents for the router, but we need to change the systems as well. One of the interesting novelties in flexible communities was the propagation scope, when we could transfer these attributes and tools not only to your neighbor, but you can control the type of neighbor you're transferring the information to. And if it was a customer, it was one story. If it was another type of client, it was different. And this idea is used in some of the committees with some curators and supervisors, and that is the decision that is made for the whole BGP network. As far as I know, the implementation of flexible communities, except some examples, has not been fully done. And another option was suggested. It was called wide communities. The idea is quite similar to flexible communities. The basic difference is that here you can control the range of this propagating activities. So you can specify that it is not only for our neighbors or our customers, but you can also specify the volume, the amount of the data that will be transferred. Of course, you can use AS4 clean solution, and theoretically it can work, but from the practical point of view, if you have a look at it, how it looks like, we will see that in order to transfer the information with 8 bytes into the community, it will have a very complex structure, and it will occupy much more space. And in the times of JSON and encoding and other formats, it's quite it's not typical for those systems, and it's not very relevant in this regard. Talking about the implementation, the main argument was that it was very difficult to implement and to embed it. The vendors that studied this option, they gave the common answer: we are not going to do that, because the implementation of such mechanism and such protocol will cost too much. And if we have a look at the implementation, except the experimental ones, we will see that vendors of the equipment did not support this idea. So we had to tackle this problem. And about a year ago, several operators gathered together, and they thought about some solutions. And as a result, they elaborated specification 8092, the standardization that has gone through the way of being just an idea. It took it 11 months to be fully implemented, and now this process is complete, and it proves that IT can work rapidly when it is necessary. The community of operators, they were speaking with a loud voice, then they were able to resolve this problem. Before that, for almost a decade, we were trying to resolve it, and it didn't give any result. What about large communities? What is the main idea? We would like to change the existing well-known mechanism for us. This mechanism should have the possibility of bearing the information for autonomous systems, and we need more fields there. In standard communities, we have only two fields, autonomous systems and arguments, and it is not always sufficient for us. So we needed some requests, and we needed to get some data or information from our neighbor. And in order for it to work efficiently with standard communities, we had to streamline the values, and we didn't always achieve these results. To get back an argument for autonomous system led to some conflicts, because the number of autonomous system can get into the interval that will not give us an opportunity to reach the purpose. On the other hand, the mechanism from the point of view of operations should be a well-known one. Yes, of course, the control over what will be transferred, how it will be sent. Of course, these are important, interesting functions. It would be good to have those functions, but we can live even without them. And so what did we get as a result? It looks like this. It is similar to standard communities, 3 fields instead of 2 ones, and each field bears the information about ASN4. This is a new BGP attribute. It's not an extension. It's not something that should not require compatibilities. It's just a different element that is sent to the neighbor. If he does not understand it, it's just like that. He just ignores it. And there is no reverse compatibility. That was the decision that was made quite consciously, because if we wanted to make something different, we should not be looking at how we can get that into the existing systems, into existing mechanism. It was a different solution to this problem. So if you need to resolve the problem, then use it. But there is a certain price we have to pay for that, the incompatibility between those two systems, because they cannot support this type of functionality. Large communities do not have the well-known standard communities, and that was done on purpose as well. If you need to control the prefix from not going away from outside of your autonomous system, then you use standard communities. And in this attribute, you do not have to specify the number of autonomous system. And if you'd like to use another type of functionality when you transfer the information, there are some possibilities in those large communities. We have 3 reserved values for global administrator skills, and we see them here. It has been done in order to be prepared for acting in future. If you need some extensions, so you can use those fields as identifiers. How does that work from the point of view of routing policy? The format and the presentation of large communities, these are the 3 numbers. And we see that all those numbers are equal. Interpreting of the first one as autonomous system, that is just a problem of definition. You can be using any number you'd like, And BGP as a protocol and as a community, they do not have any limitations. If we talk about global network, that's just a matter of agreements of all the stakeholders that the first of these numbers will represent an autonomous system, and the rest, those two, will have the meaning inside this autonomous system. X and Y numbers cannot be used for any purposes, and it is recommended to use the format for large communities, contact DSN. And here we have the autonomous system with the following argument. We can perform such an operations if we speak about equivalently, for example, to change the location. Then we have some values in standard communities and local preference. You can specify just the number you'd like to have. Large communities allow you to make that very functional, to put any local preference you'd like to. Of course, from the point of view of operational security, you have to have a closer look at it. But if you'd like to give our customer or client a possibility to change this local policy as he would like to, then this mechanism with the function and the tool, you can easily achieve it. There are two groups of large communities, some agreements, and informational and action. When we receive some information that something has happened somewhere, and through that information, the autonomous system get the prefixes, and the operators are interpreting the incoming data. The operator can get this data from the client, and then he gives that to another operator at the point of exchange, or operator can give that to his own upstream, or operator can give that to another geographical locations. It can be encrypted, it can be encoded in the function and in the argument, and they are requesting for some actions, for example, changing local preference, or making something connected with the prefixes, or signal something else.
One of the interesting function is geolocation. 32 bits of arguments. We can put a great deal of information here, and one of the variants is coordinates. Then you can use codes of countries, codes of regions, and some numbers. One interesting example in the UK. The UK uses postal codes up to the 7 characters. These may be digits or characters, 36 characters. If we record into 36 data, we may put on prefix geolocation information at the level of the postal index where the prefix is located. Some examples. MSK IX, thank you for hosting of this forum. What you can use now, there is no need for translation tables. We can use the information IS4 an autonomous system directly. It's a very good example of how it's called hacks. There is translation tables, and if autonomous system more than 50,000 of capacity, you can use this for less values. Then examples how you can interpret large community. This is a level 3 operator that is announced black hole on some prefix. You can do this by 2 means. It may be either argument or a function. It's a question of agreement between the level 3 and their neighbors. The third example, the information about large community, it describes the path of a prefix. It was received from entity clients located in some region, and then that prefix was transferred to level 3 in the US as per. It depends on the values that each operator publicize, and it can be made at the level of GS tracehouse. Some examples of migrations: how to use the variants of the policy that is in standard community, and how to translate this to the large community. The first line shows the possible conflicts. 65400 can be used by more than one operator. In the example of large communities, on the front you have the context 2914 and only entity. Only for entity it does matter. Every transit node can interpret this because it's visible. It's not a leakage of information. Only entity understands directly what these arguments mean. Next two lines, another example of routing policy in Internet Exchanger. How it can be done, controlling update whether to give or not to give to a certain kind of a peer. When we use different standard communities, we have a unified function, this similar function, but the argument is different. If we use, for example, the policy that changes another attribute, 43760 double column 0, for example, we can use other attributes. Compatibility. Large communities, they are non-compatible. We should understand this. It's not a bug, it's a feature. It was done initially. It's another object. If we look at the BGP, the protocol BGP, it's a different object. If we look from the operator client side, for them, it's not important what kind of object they deal with. It's just a way to transmit the information. Large community can be used to transmit the information via standard community. It's not compatibility. It's one of the functions that carry the implication of the standard community. If we use the zero function, the function 0, the argument may be this similar as to the standard community. What else may happen with large communities? Large communities, it's not an attempt to substitute all the mechanisms related to BGP communities. Standard communities, they will stay relevant for foreseeable future. Extended communities, they will remain. They have the similar problem. They are not as for pure. It's another problem. It's being resolved, but it has nothing to do with large communities. There's an opinion that there was a huge battle between large communities and right communities. One of them win, one of them lose. Our white communities, they have the ideas that may make something useful. The fact that there is the realization of white communities, this situation may change. White communities may do what large communities do, and even more. If you look at the context of white communities, it's a very small amount that covers this issue. If you look at realization side, all the vendors either they have the products that support this or they are planning to do this. If you look at the open source vendors, they have working implementations. If you look at real prefixes of global network, the instances of large communities do exist, and there are a great deal of them, and not all of them came from large source or implementation. What shall we remember? What an operator of large communities should remember? For this thing to work and to work better, everybody has to support this. It's the issue about the fact if you use some functionalities and other people in the network should do the same. From my point of view, it's the matter of time. Specification is done, implementation will arrive. We need some efforts from the operator side to propagate this and to implement this. To do an update from for a router, it's easier. But what's more difficult is to change, to make the changes to the whole infrastructure. For example, handling the database. We need an agreement whether or not we need some well-known functions. For example, the argument 0, it means not to announce argument 2, another issue. Summarizing, it's a small introduction to BGP. It's a new things into BGP that managed to cover a huge gap of functionality that has existed in BGP for a long time. Today, BGP, it's a bit fixed. It's not difficult talking about an implementer or an operator side. It's not difficult to understand. It's not difficult to use. This mechanism gives to operators much freedom to express their routing policy. If you need more details, you can enter largebgpcommunities.net. There is the status of vendors, their plans, their history as large communities, how large communities come to life, different jerks and something related things. That's all from my point. If there are questions, or if there are tomatoes to throw to me, I am ready. I am Sergey Mesayedov. I am the engineer from the internet. Thank you for your presentation. I'd like to ask the question. Nothing has been said about in relation to BGP security yesterday presentation. Is there the opportunity in wide introduction of the large community to trace road malfunction? Short answer, yes. It does depend. Large community is a mechanism for information transfer. If somebody places into the large community the information that this prefix should have been originated in some geographical topological region, this can be used to, for example, community assessed that it should be originated in Australia, but it came from America. What we must remember is the attribute that is visible to everybody and that can be changed. Communities, they don't fall into BGP signing. It was done purposely because communities are changing. On the one hand, this mechanism wouldn't be reliable, but to use this as an indicator from technical point of view, it's possible. The main issue is where to get this information from. If in this large community that carries the information from the point of origin of prefix, if the data are inaccurate, it may be considered as a hijacking. It's an issue of higher notion, where we receive this information from. The second issue, whether or not this information is trustworthy. I'm Pavel Lunin. The question is not related to large communities, but relates to the topic. Do you know about the plans or on recommendations how to process semantics of communities and large communities, namely? Because main tools, they have fixed values. It's not always convenient. If, for example, the field more than this is information. If less, it's action. To do this with this current mechanisms, sometimes it's strange. Sometimes we need the opportunity if larger or less. Although large communities give the opportunity to code more information, and it requires more tools for processing of this information. Do you know anything? Large communities is a kind of container. It carries the information to somebody. How to interpret this information? It's the question of policy. Whether or not it can be interpreted as a range or a regular expression is the issue of implementation. If the platform allows this, you can make use of this.
And if we speak about having some unified format for routing for all the vendors to support, of course, nothing like this will happen because each of the vendors has his own viewpoint, his own vision, and they do what is beneficial and profitable for them. And if we talk about whether we will have some standardization performed by some organization and what it will mean for the industry, we do not have the signed agreement for that. There are some best practices applied for this purpose. We are using values like 0 means not announcing, the 1 means announcing, and some blacklist values as well. But the operators should come to an agreement, should negotiate those things between themselves. And that can be the topic for an ENOG meeting or for other forums for carriers and operators. One of the problems is quite simple. Each operator has his own routing policy that is congenial for them. Some of them, they use a value with 27 or value 104, and it could be difficult to change that because the operator is used to a certain structure, automated structure, and everything is embedded into the structure. To make an agreement between the operators could be possible, but for that, operators and carriers should get together and discuss the existing problems. and they should talk about it, and then they can elaborate some common decision. Yes, I understood your answer, but I was not asking specifically about that. I was talking about the mechanism of how we check these values, for example, 104. So today we either have the fixed value of 104 or some regular value depending on the configuration of the router, and is the value of the community larger than the certain value to understand the approximate range. As an engineer, I'm lacking this type of functionality. It's not completely connected to a large community topic, and in general, I understood your answer. Well, if some vendor elaborates their policy for the range of values from 0 to certain points, yes, it can be adopted, it can be implemented in practice, and it can be done in compliance with the protocol. But this is a matter of how policy is implemented and put into practice. Alexander Azimov, Quaterlab. First of all, I'd like to thank you and the authors of this study, because these changes, they give us a unique chance and opportunity to bring together everything the operators have in Russia to support large communities. And I have the following question. So you showed us examples with NTT and other examples here, yes. So the question is, why in the framework of NAC you have not fixed the 32 bits? It's not necessarily like this. If I understood you right, 32 bits, why they were not indicated for the autonomous system, not targeted for that? Yes, the first 32 bits and the number of the system. No, it's recommended to do like that, but it's not obligatory. Why? Well, because we can have specific examples, BGP, for example, not for global unified strategies, but for data centers. We can take some concrete specific examples. And there, large communities have the information not about the autonomous systems, but about the physical geolocation of their respective component and the number of the code. It's not an autonomous system. In an autonomous system, there is a common value for each segment, but some other components can be changing there. In data centers, they were also interested in expanding the content. It's not only the problem for its autonomous systems. Data centers are also stakeholders there. It's just a container about with the information about 96 bits, and there is an agreement of specific user. And if we talk about the global network, it is recommended to use as the first component the number of AS, and if we have an agreement between two operators, that is the matter of negotiating. So they should talk together and decide what they will be using. The protocol of identification does not enforce it. So it's just a recommendation. It's not obligatory. Do we have any more questions? Thank you.